What a beautiful day to just buy some food in the Markarth market. Oh no, I've been stabbed for a reason I don't know because I haven't read the Forsworn lore yet. Now, in the last video, we discussed all the known afterlives the Elder Scrolls had to offer, and that's where my next journey begins. But wherever I'm going, this meat sack I used to live in can't tag along. So where's he going? Today, I'm gonna break down the way each race buries their dead and mourns the loss of their loved ones, so that when you finally bite the dust, you at least know where that beach bod you've been working on is gonna end up. Now for this one, I'm going to assume that you're familiar with where the remains of the Nords usually end up. Maybe a little more familiar than you'd like, actually. Most Nord cities like Whiterun, Riften, and Solitude all each have their own Hall of the Dead. These burial halls are overseen by a priest of Arche who ensures the bodies are properly consecrated and cared for.
Bombastic side-eye.
In some cases, these priests are actually chosen to learn the proper burial rites and prayers starting as early as childhood. Way to kill the magic in a kid's life. Alright, son, happy 8th birthday. Now embalm your grandfather. Once a priest has officially completed their training, they are entrusted with a ceremonial dagger that will be used, among other tools, to embalm the bodies. However, embalming was a practice that was widely forgotten by around the 4th era. And as you could imagine, every priest of Arche is required to wear an amulet of Arche, which can be used to calm the restless dead who are known to sometimes awaken from their eternal sleep. And as you probably know, there are just some regular graveyards in some cities, the most notable one probably being Falkreath, which, if you're not familiar, is a small hold where many great battles took place and countless Nord warriors were buried. The men and women buried in these graveyards are given the same rites and rituals as one buried in the Hall of Dead. It's just a change of scenery. However, in most cases of outside burial, the ceremony is often put on hold until the frozen ground is thawed enough to dig due to Skyrim's harsh weather conditions. And as you probably guessed, the barrows you can find across Skyrim are another familiar yet long forgotten form of burial among the ancient Nords. In most cases, these burials are reserved to a specific Nordic clan, usually being watched over by their own relatives who keep out intruders and tend to their dead. And in some unique cases, there are barrows where honored warriors, jarls, kings, and other forms of nobility lay rest. A good example of this one would be Corvinjund, the final resting place to Orcish of Winterhold, a Nordic high king who was the last in line during the Ysgramor dynasty, who is also believed to be the last monarch to wear the legendary jagged crown. And finally, the last known Nordic burial practice is burial by fire. A Nord may choose to be burned upon his death. It wasn't a common choice, but it did happen. Their body... Fucking... Oh, hey, look at that. Thanks for the subscriber. Their body would be cremated, and a priest of Arche would consecrate the ashes to ensure their soul departs to their respective afterlife. So just in case you weren't aware of what's in those urns every time you stick your hand in to grab some coin, just know you're stealing from the forbidden Nesquik jar. Okay, so a lot of the Nordic burial rituals might have sounded familiar to you, but the Argonians have some very interesting lore for this video. When an Argonian dies, their remains are brought back to the Black Marsh, and they are laid to rest in the swamp so that their life force can return to the Hist and they can be reincarnated once more. Argonians who died away from the Hist and are left to rot over time can still be saved as well, as it is claimed that their bones can be returned to the Hist the same way. As long as they end up there at some point, they're pretty much good to go. Now, with the average burial of an Argonian, they are fitted with a wooden funerary mask and buried in the ground. However, with this burial, they are pinned to the ground with a zulvat, or a grave stake. I hope I said that right. This is so the body doesn't float to the surface when the marsh floods, and also prevents the corpse from rising from the dead as a bog blight. But this stake isn't just a sharpened piece of wood. It is said that everything you could think of that is significant in this Argonian's life is carved upon this stake. Tales of battles won and lost, names of friends, dreams, and nightmares they've had. Their burial stake is their obituary. In some cases, they are laid to rest at the roots of the Hist, while others are buried in graveyards, places that hold sentimental value to them, or in some cases, the very spot where they died. Finally, the grave stake is used as a headstone of sorts and serves as a memorial until it is eventually washed away or deteriorates into the Black Marsh. And when an Argonian tribesman dies, a person known as a grave singer is called upon to tend to the body and stake it to the ground. These grave singers are known to be the only ones who can read the stakes when someone dies. And also, they sing the fallen one's final song. That's all I could really get about that. There was no details what kind of song it was, you know. Maybe some salsa, like, I don't know. Couldn't find anything else about that. And finally, there is one additional step to the ritual for the Nagakor tribe in particular, that being harvesting scales, skin, bones, and other parts of the bodies of the fallen kinsmen so the tribe can make more weapons and armor. However, at this point, the Argonian spirit has returned to the Hist, so this will not cause them to be at eternal rest. Traditionally speaking, the Bretons were required to cremate their dead, and for some reason it's believed that this was influenced by the High Elves, who were also known to cremate their dead. And this tradition lasted longer in the north than it did in the south, where Imperial burial customs were starting to influence the Bretons. And by the Second Era, Bretons had entirely abandoned cremation, and all of the dead from the most humble peasants to the highest king were buried underground, except in some cases where they had burial crypts for kings and high-status nobles, or in some cases ancestral tombs. Again, it's kind of like the Nords, just wherever they decided they want to go. But they also had special crypts for dishonored kings and nobles. And these crypts were designed to be forgotten by history and their descendants as if they never even existed. But most Bretons who were just average people were buried underground, or in some cases ancestral tombs, which are often guarded by a priest of Arche. There's also something called the 3 consecrations that a priest of Arche must perform on Bretons during different parts of their life. And these 3 rituals go in order as follows: Arche's grace, which is bestowed upon the birth of a Breton to protect their innocent soul until they're old enough to exercise free will; Arche's blessing, which is bestowed upon the dying to prevent their souls from being used without consent; and Arche's law, which is bestowed upon the deceased so that their remains may not be raised for unlawful servitude through necromancy. However, necromancy is still very common in High Rock due to battlefields being riddled with bodies of fallen soldiers that have not received a final consecration protecting them from these necromantic practices. So in a way, it's kind of like the Bretons are the opposite of the Nords. Whatever you do not die in battle. That's about it. Khajiit have always buried their dead underground in coffins where they are placed with their most precious possessions from life. And most of these burials are protected in the name of the Moon Clergy. Another common practice is for families to be buried together so their spirits can rest in the afterlife. And I'm going to try my best with this word. There's also a slight difference in tradition for the Anequin, which are the Khajiit from northern Eliswer, where they're often buried with just a small cairn of stones. This is because the warm, dry desert sand will do all the work in preserving the bodies of the Khajiit for hundreds of years with no other preparation needed. On the other hand, the Palatinian Khajiit to the south of Eliswer live in a much more humid climate. They often bury their dead the same way, however they will decay at a much more rapid pace. And kiddies of higher nobility or status typically prefer to be buried in catacombs. How are you liking these puns in these videos? Smash like. It is also common practice that Khajiit plant waning lilies at holy sites in order to remember beloved family members who have passed on to the sands behind the stars. And finally, one thing to note is that almost no Khajiit are ever anointed with Arche's blessings due to their particular beliefs. It is also said to be true that at the port of Senchal and elsewhere, one can purchase anything, including the bodies of the recently deceased for some reason. This combined with the fact that they are almost never blessed by Arche's law makes Eliswer one of the easiest places to practice necromancy in all of Tamriel. You want to give necromancy a shot? You hate Maik the Liar? Just wait until you can buy him at the pawn shop and go crazy. The Redguards have a tremendous amount of respect for their dead ancestors, so much so that their tombs and halls of the dead are even larger and more ornate than their own homes they live in. While in some cases, royal families or higher nobility will build their own private tombs in secluded places and protect them with traps and magical seals, the Redguards build large, beautiful cemeteries and halls fit for everyone. Poor or rich, these places rest all kinds of fallen Redguard due to their beliefs. It doesn't matter who they are. They were loved in life and missed in death. They're all human, and they all deserve a nice final resting place. However, there is an exception to thieves and criminals of no honor, as they are left to rot in desecrated grounds, often far away from civilization. But if they were later believed to be innocent, it is possible to retrieve their remains and later consecrate them so that they may be entered into the necropolis. Priests known as throne keepers worship Tawaka and protect the many necropolises all across Hammerfell. Their main job is tending to the embalmed bodies, which are entombed to prevent the desecration desecration of the necropolis in which all the dead will rise. If the necropolis does become desecrated and all of the dead rise, they can call upon Tawaka's breath, which is a sacred ritual that puts the dead back to rest. Now, I'm gonna move on because I'm starting to realize that there's even more lore to the burial procedures in some of these races than there is for their afterlives. And I don't want this video to take a month to make. Maybe one day I'll do some deep dives on these individual races as a whole, but for now, I'm just aiming to give y'all a general understanding of the way these races deal with their dead. So let's just move on to the next one. Now, real quick, in the last video, I said that Malakath was the Daedric prince of lies, deception, and hypocrisy, and many of you corrected me saying that describes the Daedric princess Mephala. Not to pass the blame here, but this is exactly what the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages described Malakath as, so somebody copy and pasted in the wrong page. Anyway, let's move on. Whether an orc believes in Malakath or Trinimac, the tradition has always been, and likely always will be, cremation. Ashes from chiefs and kings are often forged into swords or other items to be remembered by their relatives or successors. It is a common custom to place the ashes of the fallen orc under a cairn out in a field to bathe in the open sky, and atop this cairn their arms and armor are typically placed, and this serves as a spot their loved ones can come and honor them. And while the orcs never practiced burial themselves, they do respect the traditions of other races, and due to the code of Malakath, likely will always show respect when coming across a random grave. However, there is one exception, being Honor's Rest, which was a catacomb built by Orc, Breton, and Redguard masons after the destruction of the first Orsinium. This is believed to be the only place in which orcs are buried under cover instead of under the open sky. Orc corpses are also particularly valuable in the necromancy practice for reasons I covered in a previous video where I did a deep dive into necromancy. So if you decide to go watch that video after this one, it would really give me little ancestral moths in my stomach seeing a view or two pop up on that one. All right, let's talk about the cannibals now. The remains of all Bosmer are buried by their relatives, or if killed by other wood elves, as mentioned in the afterlife video, their killer must eat the wood elf they killed as part of the meat mandate clause in the Green Pact before 3 days pass. You know, this has got me thinking, if a wood elf gets jumped by like 5 other wood elves and kills them all, does he just have to sit and Matt Stoney their asses until they're all gone? Do they have to eat the gross shit like the eyes or where poop comes from? Are they allowed to cook them or at least put some seasoning on them? So after they eat their victims, they basically just bury the skeleton and call it a day. This makes necromancy less common in Valenwood due to the fact that most bodies found there are just skeletons, which are harder to raise back to life. And it's a running joke among the Bosmer that those who weren't eaten after death are yet again being risen to do some bullshit they don't want to do. And naturally, due to the nature of the wood elves maintaining the nature of their home in a natural way, Bosmer architecture is based upon shaping trees into the form they desire as opposed to building monumental burial sites. In most cases, burial sites are typically just groves. You'd hardly ever be able to tell you just stumbled into a graveyard. And finally, there is a tradition known as the Morning Star, practiced nearly everywhere outside of the cities of Valenwood. When a tribe member is murdered, the tribe will retaliate by raiding with the sole purpose of taking hostages to replace their dead comrade. If the fallen Bosmer was the tribe's chief or some other high rank, many hostages would likely be taken in order to balance out the value. And after weeks of torture in order to test their grit, the Bosmer hostages who survive are happily welcomed into the clan. And traditionally, the new tribesman is given the deceased tribesman position, his possessions, and even his family. But this practice has since been all but forgotten in modern ages. Altmer have always been known to cremate their dead and bury their ashes in wall shrines. Kings and other nobility of the Altmer commonly build massive mausoleums where their royal bloodlines rest. These mausoleums typically become a sort of temple for the descendants and especially new rulers and royals who come to pay their respect and seek guidance. Due to the high level of respect the Altmer have for their deceased, necromancy is one of the highest forms of crime a person can commit in the Somerset Isles, and they can expect the worst possible punishment for it. The necromancers are typically sent to magical prison mausoleums among other criminals whose bad deeds were deemed too horrific by the Altmer to ever see the light of day again. And that's where they lie to be forgotten forever. When a dark elf dies, their remains are burned so that, quote, he may return to the ash from whence he came. It is the most important duty of a relative of this fallen dark elf to make sure their ancestors' ashes are properly entered into a city of the dead such as Necrom. However, as a sign of great honor and sacrifice, an ancestor may allow parts of their remains to be used as part of a ghost fence to protect their family. Which, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but it sounds like a ghost fence is actually a physical barrier that is used to ward off danger. An example being the Great Ghost Fence, an enormous ethereal wall surrounding the crater of Red Mountain that was developed to keep the Blight and Corpus monsters contained within the Red Mountain area. And as tradition would have it, each Dunmer house has an ancestral shrine. In the more poor homes, it may just be a spot over the fireplace where some of the personal belongings of their ancestors are left to pay their respects, but the more wealthy Dunmer homes have a room dedicated to the use of venerating their ancestors. And only the most powerful Dunmer families have ancestral tombs dedicated to the worship of their ancestors, where they can essentially worship and make offerings to their ancestors in exchange for information, training, or blessings from ancestors long past. Dunmer nomads, otherwise known as Ashlanders, typically just bury the cremated bodies of their brethren and mark the place with a cairn, which usually have some stuff that person owns sitting on top of them. We still hate the Imperials over here, so they're getting a short explanation. Every Imperial is given the 3 consecrations of Arche, including criminals who were executed by law and buried in either Imperial graveyards or crypts depending on their status in life. And though it may sound basic, the Imperial government still does give some corpses to certain necromancers allied with the state to practice their art, so like, there's some under the table stuff going on there. It is believed that to the Reachmen, the relationship between hunter and prey is closely tied to their beliefs about life and death. Forsworn clans are known to wear amulets or talismans connecting to that understanding as a constant reminder, and these items can vary between clans. Members of the Wildblood clan, for example, are responsible for creating talismans that are unique to each individual person or their family. These talismans are an important part of guiding their loved one's spirit home and are kept by their relatives in remembrance. The Reachmen are also known to share similar burial practices with their Nord and Breton relatives. Members of the Spirit Blood clan felt that defending the ways of their ancestors will be honored by having totems of the brave erected in their honor. And while the knowledge of the specific burial practices the Reachmen practiced are sparse, there is one known example being the legendary Red Eagle. To make it short, there was essentially a large ceremonial funeral for him where many clans attended and he was sealed in a tomb forever. There's a whole lot more to it than that, but I plan on eventually doing a deep dive on Forsworn lore, so I guess you guys will just have to wait. Keep your eyes peeled for that one. Bet you weren't expecting this one, motherfucker. This one was actually requested by my friend and fellow YouTuber Broken Skull. The Falmer actually have very simple and primal burial procedures. Now, believe it or not, the Falmer are still a very religious breed, but again, this topic is also for a future video. Falmer burial procedures are more for utility than for respect or honor. Upon death, a Falmer's kin will dismember their body and bury them in their farmlands. This is because Namira, the Daedric princess of hunger, and more specifically in this case, the goddess of the dark, Namira is in a way an agricultural deity. She is said to be associated with the fungal crops that the Falmer grow and the creatures that lurk in their deep dark caves such as the Charis. And the Falmer bury the remains of their fallen kin in the fungi fields as a sacrifice to Namira, who they believe eats their remains in exchange for an abundance of crops. Simple, yet effective. Good old-fashioned cult shit. How cool would a movie about Falmers be? Could you imagine? Not a Skyrim movie, but a movie in the Skyrim universe about a hunter who accidentally fell into a Falmer cave and has to, like, fight his way out. Like Descent, but with Skyrim. Someone needs to get Todd Howard on the fucking phone right now. And here we are. I think I've covered at least the majority of the funerary practices. There was a couple others I thought I'd cover, but we just didn't. I couldn't seem to find anything on vampires or werewolves or Dwemer, but I feel like they each have their own reasons for being so elusive. So 12 kinds of burials down and another chunk of lore in the books. This topic went way deeper than I thought it would. I personally thought the Argonians had a really cool part in this video. Let me know which one was your favorite in the comments. And if you don't have a favorite part, at least give me a "man, I'm dead" in the comments so I know you made it this far. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing because it's free and you can always change your mind later. And until we meet again, I hope your adventures in life lead to the happiness and success you deserve. Watch the skies, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Oh.